reactionary politics and reactionary thinkers did not like this kind of situation any more than many leftists did, which I think has been a hard thing for a lot of leftists to wrap their head around, right? And this is because a lot of reactionaries associated what we might call the neoliberal Thatcherite era, yes, with support for capitalism, which we were very happy with, right? But also kind of social liberalism that was creeping in to every sphere of life. And what reactionaries were able to do was develop a kind of faux time consciousness that suggested, well, we're not going to move forward to the future because the future remains canceled. The socialist future remains canceled, if you want to use that terminology. But we can bring something back that they've taken away from you. And that's, the time when you as a white man were king of your own little castle, right? Or, this was your country, a white man's country. They really were able to capture a lot of enthusiasm for change that ideally should have gone to us, people on the left. We were just not able to develop a sufficiently inspiring project that was aimed at the future to break out of the kind of malaise that one would associate with, to use the terminology, like the end of history kind of period.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le bunga, bunga.
Hello everyone, welcome back to BungaCast, the global politics podcast at the end of history. I'm Alex Hochuli in São Paulo, Brazil, joined by George Hoare in London. Hello.
Hello. Why did you say hello so skeptically? I am in London. And hello.
Hello. Is that the right thing to say? Hello. Is that where we are?
Heidi, hi, howdy.
Yeah.
What's up? There are lots of options.
I was going to say, you can always go like sup or something.
Yeah, I never get any good responses from what's up. So it's... Anyway, that other voice you've just heard is Matt McManus, who's assistant professor at Spelman College and the author of The Rise of Postmodern Conservatism and The Political Theory of Liberal Socialism, amongst other books. And we're going to be talking specifically about that notion of postmodern conservatism today. Hi, Matt.
Hey, great to talk to you. And shout out to all the damage readers. Great magazine.
Very good.
What a great guest. He's doing things that, no offense, Alex, you should be doing.
I like the magazine. I've enjoyed writing for it. I've enjoyed the feedback from readers and editors, right? What's not to like?
He's not even paid to say that. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. Well, as you may have gathered, this is an episode in partnership with Damage Magazine. We're actually going to be talking about and around the issues presented in Matt's piece in the fifth issue. The fifth issue is on the pre-political. And we recently had a go at explaining what the pre-political was on this podcast, because it's one of the five big kind of overarching priorities or themes that we want to explore on the podcast this year and beyond. So you'll have to listen to that episode. We did that in the Reading Club, which has just come out today as we record this, which is Thursday, the 5th of February. You, listener, will be hearing this a few weeks on from that, but I would urge you to check that out, not least because the issues and themes discussed in that Reading Club episode pertain, I think, quite directly to what we're going to be discussing here. So it's a way of elaborating on that. One of the themes that we want to focus on this year as a priority, as well as the pre-political, is also political recombinations, which is a way of saying that politics is back, but crazier than ever, or to put it a little bit more sophisticatedly, to say that various forms of ideology today are perhaps confused. They implicate different class alignments behind different politics. And even perhaps the very notion of ideology has changed. We went through maybe the end of ideology in the 1990s, and a lot of ideological talk is back, but in very weird ways. And often these aren't thick ideologies, which answer all sorts of questions about life, society, relations, etc., but only answer a few of them, making them thin ideologies. So that's something that we discussed in a bigger discussion in the Reading Club about a concept called illiberalism, which we may draw upon. I say all this, one, to kind of tell Matt about what we've been recently doing, but also tell listeners that if you want to flesh this out, go check out that latest Reading Club episode. In fact, one more reference I'd like to make in terms of stuff that we've just put out. We have an episode which came out at the start of this week with J.F. Trollet on the radical right and its foreign policy, the relationship between paleoconservatives and neocons, which is more important in the Trump administration, and indeed the relationship between paleocons and the European new right, how much these pursue a civilizational perspective, civilizational nationalism, perhaps. So digging into the roots of the contemporary right, which we don't even know what to call it. I mean, I think we've been generally calling it the radical right on this podcast, but people knew it as the alt-right back when maybe it was the alt-right and it no longer is that. Maybe it's no longer alt because it's the main right today. Anyway, maybe these are questions that we will deal with today. But specifically, what we're going to get on to is this now very worn out old notion of postmodern, postmodernity, postmodernism, and whether the right, whether the conservatives are as postmodern as the postmodernists they critique or used to critique. So just to start us off, Matt, although we've talked about it many times on this podcast, it'd be useful to get a bit of a summary of the postmodern condition, or the postmodern, or postmodernism, however you prefer, as a way to start us off to understand what we're referring to when we talk about conservatism and postmodernism.
Sure. Well, the term postmodern or postmodernity obviously is eminently contentious, and how you define it is not a neutral activity. I'm not saying anything that people don't know, because if you define it in more negative or descriptive terms, that's going to kind of connote or denote the politics that you're associating with it. Broadly speaking, I discuss two ways that people have understood postmodernism or postmodernity. One of which is the one that you'll usually see caricatured and criticized in conservative media, which refers to a kind of offensively French form of intellectual and aesthetic activity. This is, the kind of way that you'll see postmodern neo-Marxism described by people, for instance, like Jordan Peterson. And the idea is that once upon a time, we were committed to Enlightenment principles of reason, tradition, law and order, formal equality before the law, all the good things that, Ronald Reagan and al would sign off on. And then these nasty French theorists and bewildering artists came along, and they decided to undermine all that by, you take your pick, deconstruction, genealogical analysis, critiques of meta-narratives, and, they associate that with a drive towards a certain kind of left-wing politics, whether Marxism or you name it, right? A good example of this, since I already mentioned Peterson, would be Stephen Hicks, right? In the 2000s, Stephen Hicks, for those who don't know, is an objectivist, libertarian philosopher, right? Follower of Ayn Rand. He wrote a book about the connection between postmodernism and socialism, essentially arguing that postmodern theorists were trying to advocate for socialism by any other name, just with a bunch of identitarian flourishes. Now, that's not the form of postmodernism that I'm really interested in, mostly because I think, by and large, it's a pretty bunk way of looking at things. As somebody who's a lot more sympathetic to Marx and Marxist analysis, when I talk about the postmodern condition, I'm referring to what Jameson, for example, would describe, right? A kind of cultural mode of approaching the world, or culturally mediated mode of approaching the world that impacts many different domains of life: art, politics, philosophy, movies, obviously, the internet and different digital spaces. And by and large, Jameson and other Marxists are quite critical, actually, of the postmodern condition. You can also think about people like David Harvey or Terry Eagleton, right? In no small part because they see the postmodern condition as putting restrictions on the possibility of achieving something like a socialist revolution or even socialist reformism. And we can get into why they think that way. My view on postmodernity, I'd say, is a little bit more granular. So in my book, The Emergence of Postmodernity, I claim that the primary catalysts for its appearance are liberalism, secularism, and capitalism, of course. And I would argue that the primary characteristic of postmodernity, and this is a point I take from Mark Fisher, is the dissolution of historical time consciousness and the kind of retrenchment of a phenomenological time consciousness in its place.
Interesting stuff. So you finished on this idea of the dissolution of historical consciousness as the kind of the postmodern condition. So I guess this raises a pretty kind of significant question about postmodern conservatism, because like, isn't conservatism premised on the consciousness of the past and having some like memory of what it is you're trying to conserve? Maybe not. I mean, I guess you can conserve the present and not try and move things back to the past. But anyway, do you have I should actually arrive at a question that could be helpful. Do you have like a pithy summary or working definition of conservatism, just so we can get our listeners off with postmodernism on the one hand and conservatism on the other hand, and then they know what postmodern conservatism is, and they can, maybe they hopefully they won't stop listening at that point now that they know what it means, but they'll be grounded for the rest of the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to kind of periodize a little bit here. I know people are usually not interested in the kind of process of coming up with some of these ideas, but just to clarify. So the way that I would define the broader political right, and I say the broader political right rather than just conservatism, is very much in line with what F.A. Hayek said in his essay, Why I Am Not a Conservative. So I want to be clear, Hayek did not consider himself a conservative, and for that matter, neither do I. And Hayek said, look, when you boil it down, conservatives and people on the right generally are committed to the idea that there are recognizably superior people in society. And these recognizably superior people are entitled to more, right? Pretty much everything, right? They're entitled to more agency, more money, more power, better subscriptions to Netflix, you name it, right? They should have it all. And society is going to work best when recognizable superiors are put in charge and when people who are inherently subordinates understand their place. They kind of know the role that they are intended to play and even adopt that role, to use Roger Scruton's terminology, unthinkingly, right? In the meaning of conservatism, the great British conservative philosopher Roger Scruton commended what he called unthinking people, right? Which is something that we can get into also if you want. Now, that's the political right generally, right? This commitment to a hierarchical society where there are recognizable superiors and inferiors. How do we understand conservatism then? So conservatism in its technical usage is a version of right-wing politics that more or less sees the hierarchies that are existent in society as being the right ones at any given time, or at least the most functionally useful ones at any given time. So the goal of the conservative is essentially to, William F. Buckley once put it, stand athwart history yelling stop, right? To say that we are not going to allow progressive, liberal, democratic, feminist, you name it, forces any more kind of wiggle room, at least for right now, right? Because we're just kind of going to put a halt to all that. But it's by no means the case that all versions of right-wing politics are fundamentally conservative, right? People like Chris Rufo, I would even add Charlie Kirk, right? The late Charlie Kirk, definitely don't fall into the conservative paradigm, even if they might identify technically as conservatives, right? Kirk, for example, called for a right-wing revolution the same way Rufo called for a counter-revolution. And the idea here that you see in more radical right versions of politics is that after a certain point, they might think that there's actually nothing worth conserving any longer, right? The left, liberals, progressive forces and cultures have gained way too much ground. So the only thing to do is to actually try to restore or recover or retrieve some previous social form that's more in line with their hierarchical taste, right? Make Americans great again, meaning, make white Americans great again after generations of civil rights reforms and gains on the parts of minorities, right? Turn back the clock on gender equality and put women back in their place, all that kind of stuff. So that's, the kind of way that I had approached the broader right. Now, when I wrote the Postmodern Conservatism book, all the way back in the halcyon days of 2018, right? It's been some time, right? The way that I referred to postmodern conservatism was just as a kind of catch-all for all the forms of postmodern reactionary politics that are out there, mostly because most Americans, American people on the right refer to themselves as conservatives, right? But now I'd be a little bit more granular in how I'd use that term conservatism.
So that's some interesting stuff there. I guess one thing, just hearing you talk about that kind of conception of conservatism, and I'm aware, I don't want to kind of derail us too much, but it definitely made me think of an argument that Maurice Glassman, who you might know, the Blue Labour thinker, has been making in the British context more recently. And I think essentially what he's trying to, and his idea is only socialism can redeem conservatism. And it's actually, I think, quite a non-hierarchical conservatism, the idea that in fact the most anti-conservative force in the world is capitalism. And so the kind of, if you want to have any conserving of traditions, conserving of communities, conserving of identities, and kind of embeddedness, you need socialism. So I wonder whether, sorry, and then the question comes eventually, hopefully, whether this kind of postmodern conservatism is like quite American, or maybe maybe it's the other way around, just that the English conservatism is less hierarchical, less built on that Hayek idea. Roger Scruton, notwithstanding, but like less built on that Hayekian idea of a hierarchical society, at least in its kind of current blue Labour, red Tory kind and their followers kind of way, where it's actually conservatism is trying to protect any sort of equality or commonality that we have today.
I just want to jump in just as a comment. I suspect that conservatism doesn't exist. It's a leftist fantasy of what they want conservatives to be, the good conservatives that we can do business with, the good conservatives who are communitarian, who are kind of anti-capitalist. Out in the wild, those conservatives don't exist, and it's something that we fantasize into. Well, we
they're
think
not out
existence.
in the wilds; they're in the home counties of England.
That is the wild.
Very far from wilds.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there, right? And I think this is, again, where we need to be clear about the right way to understand conservatism, right? One way that conservatism has been misconstrued is just the kind of prudent management of change. And there's some truth to that, right? You can see that in the work of people like Edmund Burke, for example, right? And arguably, you can also see it in the work of people like the British conservative Michael Oakeshott, right? Who's probably better described as a right-wing liberal. I don't really think, though, that captures the essence of conservatism, right? Because there are, of course, as you mentioned, plenty of socialists who also think that we should be committed to the prudent management of change, or who might even be critical of capitalism as a revolutionary mode of production, precisely because they're going to say, capitalism sweeps away all the old traditions and prejudices. It colonizes the world and bastardizes local indigenous cultures, for example. And so we should kind of put the brakes on the expansion of this. And there are conservatives who sometimes can be a bit sympathetic, consequently, to various forms of socialism for this reason, right? A good example would be Carlyle, right, in the 19th century, who every now and then sympathized with elements of socialism that wanted to kind of push back against the kind of Benthamite extremism that he thought was sweeping the country. I don't think, though, that in the real world, to go back to Alex's point, people who align with right-wing politics, whether they call themselves conservatives or not, really care that much about conserving everything just for its own sake, right? They're very committed to the idea that the kind of things that are worth conserving are the social hierarchies that they feel that are necessary in order to reduce the proper kind of order. And I'll just give a couple of examples of this so people don't think I'm strawmanning. Let's think of two of the most revolutionary figures, of the last 50 years. They're Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. And they were very explicit about that, right? Margaret Thatcher, member of the Conservative Party, probably the most iconic conservative prime minister ever. In the 1980s, she used to famously say, it wasn't just about an economic revolution. She used to say that it was actually economics that was the means of changing the soul of the nation. Well, that's a very profound set of changes that you want to enact. It's not just economic tinkering or even an economic restructuring of the entire economy. You want to change the soul of the nation. Or let's look across the pond, right, to Ronald Reagan. They refer to it as the Reagan Revolution for a reason, right? And Reagan was very explicit about that also, right? He used to famously like to quote the arch revolutionary Thomas Paine by saying, we have it in our power to begin the world anew or to make the world anew. This isn't the language of J.R.R. Tolkien, right, who's saying, let's hold back the tide of modernity, let's maintain our farms, let's maintain our homesteads, keep up green spaces, as a kind of a retreat against the forces of Mordor or whatever. This is the language of somebody who's willing to conserve certain elements of society, namely the hierarchies that Thatcher and Reagan thought were appropriate to any well-functioning society. But they're also very determined to get rid of any kind of liberal or egalitarian forms like the welfare state, for example, that in that case had been around for 50 years. And just to give one more example, William F. Buckley was once challenged by know-it-all academics when he called for a kind of a rollback of the New Deal and the welfare state. And these academics would say things like, well, aren't you conservative? We've had the New Deal and the welfare state for 50 years now. Isn't this something that you should want to, conserve, right? And his response to that was always the same. Well, I don't mean conserve that. right? Because of course, poor people don't deserve a welfare state, but rich people definitely deserve another yacht because apparently they've done something to earn it.
So no, I take your point about not all people called conservatives are not radical, and yeah, I think Thatcherism as trying to create a new sort of man, the Mondeo man of the southeast of England, being one example, but maybe to kind of focus in a little bit on the article as well, on the piece as well. So who for listeners who've kind of they now have been reminded what postmodernism means, a little bit about conservatism and some of the tensions and kind of varieties there, but who should they be thinking of as the kind of key thinkers of postmodern conservatism? Is it someone like Peter Thiel, who's very interested in what comes after the human? Is he the sort of postmodernist you're talking about, or is it like is it a different sort of postmodernist in terms of a skepticism towards objective truth? Who are you really kind of talking about when you use this term postmodern conservatism?
Sure. Well, when I talk about postmodern conservatism, I list a couple of different features postmodern conservatives have. Well, I'll just focus in on one that you mentioned right now, which is this skepticism towards the claims of big R reason or Enlightenment reason. And Enlightenment reason in this respect is usually what we would associate with the claims made by liberals and socialists, usually aligned with the normative projects that holds that we should treat each as one and no more than one in terms of how we evaluate their needs and their interests from a political and a normative standpoint. So what I argue is that postmodern conservatives, when it comes to epistemology, are strategic skeptics, and their skepticism is actually meant to induce a deeper kind of dogmatism. And that might seem paradoxical, but actually I think it makes quite a lot of sense, right? What postmodern conservatives will do when confronted with the rationalistic claims of left-wing or liberal actors is just express an enormous amount of wariness of those claims and the sources that they come from, right? You're Mr. Climate Scientist, you come from Oxford or Cambridge, and you claim to me that, one day, global warming is going to destroy the planet. Well, I went outside and it's cold today, right? And it's, the middle of March. How can you possibly be right? You, Mr. Vaccine Doctor, are telling me that I need to get vaccinated. Otherwise, I'm going to spread the COVID virus. But I had a friend and he got the COVID vaccine and he still got COVID or he reacted very badly to it. So, fuck you, right? I don't have to listen to you. And, sometimes you even see this kind of rhetoric kind of pervading and postmodern conservative circles and even becoming systematized, right? When they like to present themselves as critical thinkers or taking a brave stand against the status quo, or like Chris Rufo or Charlie Kirk describing themselves as, and I quote Charlie Kirk's book here, a kind of punk thinker, right? Sticking it to the liberal establishment. But they're not really critical thinkers in any kind of comprehensive way, right? What they want to do is express criticism towards sources of epistemic authority that they don't like, precisely in order to retrench a commitment to a deeper kind of dogmatism when it comes to sources that they do happen to prefer. Because once you deny that there's any kind of validity to any thought tradition or ideological tradition that's critical of yours, then it's very easy to kind of hermetically insulate yourself and just say, well, whatever it is that my community believes goes, because the belief system that I'm being told to buy into is affecting, affirmative, and endears me to the sense of identity that's crucial to my sense of meaning in life.
So I guess following on from this kind of when you're talking about truth, post-truth, and anti-truth, and different regimes of truth, I guess if you're a Foucauldian, you could even bring that sort of thing in.
I'm not, so I just want to tell your readers, don't worry about that. Yeah.
Don't. Okay, well, I think we maybe should have more Foucault representation on this podcast. We don't have a lot of Foucauldians. We had a reading club about Foucault, and we were like, yeah, he's not good. I mean, you heard it here first.
My wife is a Foucauldian, but it might just be I read so much of him during my PhD. We called my university Foucault U. That's what York was referred to, right? So I just kind of got I had my fill of it, I think, for life. That's the unfortunate thing.
Yeah, a little bit goes a long way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A very little bit. Anyway, I don't know why I went off on that tangent. So, Steve Bannon. So this idea of is there a way to be postmodernly or postmodernly, anti, or some in some where in this vicinity, anti-truth, not by doubting like the claims of capital R reason, as you put it, or capital T truth, but by flooding the zone with just like so many things that are true that you are kind of not really pro-truth, although you say you are, because what you're really trying to do is make it more difficult for people to discern the signal from the noise. So it is a kind of a postmodern relationship to truth, in that truth's not important. Like everything's true, so nothing's really true, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like a choose your own adventure when it comes to epistemic claims, right? So let's dive into two examples. We'll go with Bannon, and then I'll go back to Charlie Kirk, because interestingly enough, I think that Kirk was in some ways the chief philosopher of postmodern conservatism shortly before he died. He laid out its epistemic framework very clearly, right? So Steve Bannon, for those who don't know, kind of cut his teeth in the Breitbart averse, right, which held that politics was downstream of culture. And you can see Steve Bannon, if you wish, as being something of a right-wing Gramscian, in the vein of someone like Alain de Benoit in France, or Sam Francis, an early American thinker. And Bannon was convinced that essentially all the main forces that were working to retrench hegemony in the United States, at least at the time when he started really coming to prominence in the 2010s, were liberal forces and left-wing forces. Now, I know many people on the left might say, well, hold on, we were hegemonic in America in the 2010s, but this is like a deep-rooted conviction on their part. And his view was, the best way to kind of combat this hegemony is to constantly raise skeptical claims against it, to constantly call into question its validity, to basically desacralize, if you want to use Courtesy Arvin's terminology, all the kind of creeds that are being espoused by the cathedral. And Bannon was savvy enough to know you don't necessarily have to replace them with anything permanent and enduring, at least right from the get-go. Because if you're engaged in a kind of Gramscian war for position, just undermining the creedal claims of the cathedral or the mainstream media or whatever you want to call it, is going to be enough to leave people open to the suggestion that maybe they should embrace another kinds of politics, especially if this doesn't just operate at an epistemic level, it also operates at the level of political legitimacy, right? They no longer believe the mainstream media or the cathedral because they think that they're liars, right? Or they can't be trusted to look after the interests of so-called ordinary people, or as Sam Francis would put it, middle American radicals, basically white people, right? So that's one example, right? The other example I would give is Charlie Kirk, right? So Charlie Kirk, shortly before he died, published a book called Right-Wing Revolution, which I reviewed for Sublation magazine. I wouldn't recommend reading it for its literary value, but there's a very interesting section, probably the only section where you actually see Kirk really dedicate original thought to the subject matter at hand. And it's on, appropriately enough, marketing. And he essentially says Americans are great marketers. We sometimes actually prefer the advertisement to the product itself. And then Kirk brings up the Geico ads. You might see the little lizard, right, with trying to sell the cell phones, right? And he says, the thing about marketing is it's about framing. And you need to approach politics like framing. And the way to do that as a conservative, and I quote here, is you need to police your own thoughts against any kind of doubt, because no one likes a salesman who doubts or is open-minded about the value of his own product, in this case, the ideology that they're trying to sell you. He says that we can't always be sure that we are right as conservatives, but we can know that the left always has to be wrong. They can never be right? We can't let them take an inch. And so he says, police your own thoughts and chase, as he calls it, a Darth Vader versus Luke Skywalker kind of framing on every kind of issue. That's the way you succeed in politics. And what's quite notable is if you read Kirk's book, he never even bothers trying to disprove any of the claims that left-wing or liberal activists or intellectuals or politicians make. And if you read his book, you'll understand why he thinks that's besides the point, right? This isn't a dialogue where the person with the better Socratic argument is going to win, let alone a kind of a Habermasian ideal speech situation where we're going to give reasons back and forth, and then the better argument will prevail because I'm trying to arrive at the truth, or so are you, or we're trying to arrive at what's normally legitimate, and so are you. This is all about framing. Acting like you are never wrong is the right way to go about this, because the same way if you're selling Cheez-Its, you want to act like this is the greatest thing in the world and nothing else can compare. If you're selling conservatism to hapless buyers, you never act like it has anything less than the solution to all the political problems in the country, the same way the left is a toxin that's responsible for all the problems in the country.
No, I think that's really nicely put. I mean, and it's a really great part of the article as well.
Hello, friend. You've reached the end of the free part of the episode. Well, we put out 2 entirely free episodes a month. The rest is for subscribers. For access, please join us at patreon.com/bungacast. For $7 a month, subscribers receive episodes with the entirety of the BungaCast cast. That's George Hoare, myself, Alex Hochuli, and our contributing editors, Philip Cunliffe, Lee Jones, Amber Lee Frost, Catherine Liu, Alex Gurevich, Ryan Zickgraf, and Lee Phillips, as well as a huge number of guests. In 2026, our priorities are to explore the following themes: emerging state capitalism, war and militarism, political recombinations and new revolts, irrationalism and unfreedom and how to challenge these ideas, and the pre-political, or the social bases on which politics may be built. We'll also be exploring these themes through the BungaCast Reading Club, through a selection of classic essays, book chapters, films, and academic articles. If you sense history accelerating but feel that we have no control over events, then join us as we try to find political clarity to move beyond the decadent age of Bunga Bunga.